Tony ti dé, ó ti dé sẹ́, ẹ̀sìn mi ariwo, ẹ̀bá sí mi agbájá, ẹ jẹ́ ká tú kẹ̀kẹ́ sílẹ̀, káwá fi ijó bẹ́ẹ̀.
Hey, hello everyone. Welcome today to a new African paradigm. We are here with the wonderful Mr. Rowland Ataguba, who is from Nigeria, but he is the managing director of Bethlehem Rail Infrastructure Limited, which is a dedicated railway project management consultancy firm in London. He has a background in architecture, quantity surveying, building management and construction. He also has an MBA with an MSc in project management from Henley Business School in London too. He has lived and worked in London for a considerable amount of time. He worked for the London Underground as well as Stagecoach Rail, which is a privatized corporation running the trains across the UK. He has also worked more recently as a project assurance advisor on the Lagos-Ibadan expressway train that's just recently been built in Nigeria. And we're going to be talking about some of those train lines today with Mr. Ataguba, and he'll be giving us some insight into the development of the African high-speed rail network system, which is currently being talked about on the continent as a solution to trade and transport within the continent. So welcome. Thank you, Mr. Ataguba, for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you. I'll be hosting this afternoon with my co-host, Pip Lawton, who is from South Africa. Everybody knows her well. Yes, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, thanks for joining us, Rowland. It's wonderful to have your company. And we're very excited to hear about a proposal that you have for the African Integrated High-Speed Rail Network. We think this proposal should be adopted as an imperative, and that it certainly should be placed on the agenda of one of the most important things to do to see the continental network roll out as quickly as possible. But before you begin with your proposal, could you just give us a very brief idea for our listeners what AIHSRN is, and what its purpose is? Over to you. Thanks, Rowland.
Okay, thank you, Philippa, and thanks, Nick, for the ringing endorsement. The African Integrated High-Speed Rail Network is a product of the collaboration of states of the African Union, seeking to integrate their economies closer, because traditionally most of the states across Africa have tended to trade with the world and less amongst themselves. And understanding quite clearly of the benefits that would arise from closer integration of their economies and greater synergies amongst their states. Couple of infrastructure projects were therefore conceived. One is the Transcontinental Highway, which of course runs goes north-south, east-west, and therefore have quite similar objectives. But one of the great imperatives for the railway is, in fact, the Africa Free Trade, Continental Free Trade Area, which has recently been inaugurated. Because the moment you start to talk about trade, then of course the transport networks become the backbone on which such trade is conducted. And historically, the African states have had a problem of integrating these transport networks. Aside from the typical barriers in terms of trans-border connections and so on and so forth, in terms of customs union and other obstacles that each would come across in if you like, corresponding with one another, is the quality of the infrastructure in itself. Francophone African countries have tended to have meter gauge railway infrastructure, meter gauge being the space between the rails, which is a meter wide. And the British colonial countries have had what you call the Cape gauge, which is slightly wider than 1 meter. It's about 1,067 millimeters. And so you had countries like Nigeria, like Ghana, South Africa, Kenya, all on the Cape gauge, or the narrow gauge as it's more commonly known. And the problem with that is that the equipment that run, the rolling stock that run on meter gauge can't run on narrow gauge, which simply means that you have these lack of continuity in terms of transportation by rail between these states. So you need to overcome that kind of difficulty. And then, of course, when you come to the Arab Maghreb states like Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, Morocco, they have tended to be riding on a different gauge as well. And so the need to harmonize these gauges is one of the imperatives of an integrated railway system. And then, of course, which invariably brings us to gauge standardization. Now, the rest of the world has migrated largely to standard gauge. And therefore, the decision was that Africa was going to build a standard gauge railway network. And so we've got those as fundamentals in terms of the conception. But then the objectives, again, of the rail network is one, because not every state in Africa has access to the sea, i.e. there are quite a number of landlocked states. And so with a rail connection, it brings quite a number of them to rail connectivity or to connections to the sea or to export potentials internationally. And then, of course, you need beltways, east to west, north to south, as I said earlier. And that was also another objective of these. In fact, I think we've got a slide that may help us with that.
Could I just jump in, Rowland?
Yeah.
So this is really revolutionary for Africa. Just the thought of being able to travel on one of these 6 major corridors, the thought of being able to get on a high-speed train, 160 kilometers an hour, and go from Dakar in Senegal all the way to Djibouti on the other side, or likewise going from Tunis all the way down to Cape Town. It's revolutionary, isn't it?
Indeed, but that is really the political dimension, which is, you talk a lot about being able to travel on the railway. But the key backbone, the economic backbone to all of that, and this is where we talk about the sustainability of the investment, is really the freight. Is the ability to trade rather than the movement of people. Because don't forget, you've got the alternatives for the movement of people. And where high speed comes in is because it's able now to compete with aviation in terms of speeds. And therefore, those connectivities are important. I'm not discounting the passenger aspect. I'm just saying that, you know, the more greater economic potential comes from the ability to move freight, because Africa is a continent of huge resources and capacity to move a lot of these minerals in bulk or break bulk is a key component of trade. And it also creates the potential for the setting up of production facilities across the length and breadth of the continent. And this is where the Continental Free Trade Area comes in. And this is also where the integration of the economies of the African states becomes a very key imperative, yeah. And this is where, yes, sorry.
If I may jump on in there, I mean, exactly, you were just, you mentioned before about beltways. I guess that's really what you're getting at there when you talk about cargo and the idea of factories and industrial parks being built alongside these transport routes where cargo would pass. All of these things, these beltways cannot develop without this kind of transportation of freight. Is that what you're getting at there?
Absolutely. And a very important aspect of it. Because it's one thing to be able to build this infrastructure. I mean, we can talk about the delivery strategy in a moment. But it's one thing to build, and we're finding that out with so much dereliction and moribund infrastructure across Africa. And that is as a result of problems of sustainability. And unless you come up with a business model that enables the infrastructure to be sustainable, and then you're really building or investing huge amounts of money that in a few years' time will really go to waste. Right. And that is why there has to be a business case that supports what you're doing. And this is where there is a disconnect, especially across the continent, in terms of the political classes, in terms of the conception of these. Most of these projects are seen as nice to have, but they haven't quite addressed our minds as to how we can sustain them in the long run. And that's very, very fundamental to that.
Right. So they for now, they kind of appear to be vanity projects rather than economic integration projects.
Well, yes, they appear to be. We talk.
But is there a but to that? Do we see certain examples on the continent where train lines have been built, and do you feel that is moving towards economic integration? Take the Kenyan SGR that was recently built between Kenya and Mombasa, or actually now Naivasha.
Well, until that line gets into Uganda, it's unlikely to fulfill its potential.
Right.
That line is supposed to go not only through to Uganda, it's supposed to go on to South Sudan and into Central African Republic and link up the West Coast, if you like. There are issues with funding now, and that's held everything up. And of course, then you've got late Magafuli's effort from Dar es Salaam that's going right in and taking in Rwanda and is coming through the back into Uganda. I think we can actually put up the map. there that would really help us and give us an indication. Yes. Now we've got the. I think you've got Mombasa there.
Yes.
In Nairobi. And it's supposed to go into Uganda, into South Sudan. And we're supposed to cross through Central Africa, into Cameroon, into Nigeria, and go on across the West African coast, right up there to Dakar.
Right.
Now, it is anticipated that these things would happen. But again, it's how quickly they will. And the key question with integration is that every state is responsible for building their network or for building their components of the network. There doesn't appear at the moment to be any coordination. There's no central coordination. There's no authority that's coordinating that. Now, that responsibility is best situated with the African Union and one of its agencies, its development agency, AUDA. Certainly has the, as an institution, whether it has the capacity is another matter, but certainly can build that capacity. And it has put in some frameworks. But there is no clarity that it is proceeding in that role. And my proposal was about how we can create the capacity within the AUDA to coordinate these projects. And of course, the AUDA, number one, sits or stands from a point of weakness in the sense that it hasn't got teeth. And as you know, the old maxim of he who pays the piper calls the tune. Given that it wouldn't be paying that piper, so its leverage in terms of dictating what goes is rather limited. Notwithstanding, its authority would evolve from what is handed to it by the states. And that comes from the leverage of the African Union itself. And the states themselves would or could be made to appreciate the benefit of a central coordination of this program, and therefore would enable them give up some of these powers to the AUDA to coordinate and to effect some of these key fundamentals of the program. And I'll give you an example of what is happening now in terms of the absence of this central coordination. A lot of states get driven by political imperatives, local political imperatives, and sometimes veer away from what is wholesome or what is essential or is supportive of this vision. Take, for instance, in Nigeria. Nigeria has recently commissioned a new or a reconstruction and some extensions to its existing narrow gauge line. Now, that narrow gauge line will not integrate with the African high-speed rail network. And of course, if the AUDA were coordinating this, then perhaps the AUDA would have been able to whisper in the ears of the Nigerian state to say, well, should you be doing this? Or how can we help you to do it the right way, i.e. to build a standard gauge railway line that would integrate with the overall vision of an integrated high-speed rail. So there are little things that, or benefits that are going amiss as a result of that lack of central coordination that I talked about.
Right, and I suppose by having institutions set up like that, it would also help with organizing financing. because it would provide confidence to the investor to if they know that it's going to go cross-border, then they would be assured of the economic benefits of it.
Could do, but again, yes, in a lot of ways. But I think there's been some financial arrangements that have been brokered by the AU for this high-speed rail. But that was a long time ago, and it seems to have all gone quiet. That was with China.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Some funding arrangements in place, but then again, the strategy in terms of delivery anyway was that each state was going to finance its own part of the network, i.e. the lines that run through their country, meaning that those lines were going to be owned by the individual states. Now, and that is what's happening. And so everyone is responsible for raising the funding and so on and so forth. And of course, the states all have different economic leverages. Nigeria, for its size and the size of its economy, certainly is a bigger hitter than some of the smaller African states, and therefore is able to negotiate perhaps more beneficial financing arrangements and so on and so forth. Whereas, but that then has a feel of myopicity in terms of that's good for Nigeria, but how good is it for the rest of the continent? Whereas if you had that central coordination, it would have that bigger picture view, and therefore perhaps could provide some strategic advisory that would enable these decisions to be more measured and certainly of a global benefit.
Mm. So really, Rowland, your proposal is it's not taking any sovereignty from any particular state, because you're saying that all legality rests with each individual state, but the AU acts as a coordinating body. So there's nothing to be lost in terms of sovereignty by saying, okay, let's do this, let's work it out on a continental level. Would you agree?
Absolutely. The whole essence of AU intervention is really banging heads together. I think in business school there was a slide, and I tried to find it, unfortunately couldn't dig it up. But the essence of it is where everybody works in silos, and at the point of emergence or at the point of interface, you may just find a misalignment because there's that lack of coordination. And that's very important, that you all have that coordinator and integrator, because that's very important. And that does a lot of other things. And one of the important things about railway and where it differs from other transport networks, such as the roads, for instance, is the fact that you don't build your network or your infrastructure in isolation from the operations. You must have at the back of your mind how you're going to operate that infrastructure, what kind of equipment you're going to put on it. So as you build, you must have in mind who's going to operate it, and that operator needs to be part of the decisions in terms of the development of the infrastructure. We're not doing that very well in Africa at the moment. And that is one of the benefits you would get from bringing in a coordinator, because the coordinator would then be forced to think in terms of the operations, especially when you're talking about cross-border operations. So that is one additional benefit that would accrue from having that central coordinator.
Have you mentioned yet what kind of timescale you suggest that this be done? Given that the African Union are saying 2063, that's such a long time in the future. And I believe I've heard you say on another interview about the qualitative changes that a rail network would bring. And African people really don't have that long to wait to see the qualitative changes that railway can bring. So how many years is your proposal?
I think we were looking at a time frame of about 12 years. But then again, we were looking at phases. We were talking about a first phase. At the moment, what we have is a kind of very disjointed network because, as you rightly identified, the Kenyan component is now stuck in the sense that it's not going farther than Kenya at the moment, whereas it was conceived to go through Uganda and a few other countries.
Rowland, just to jump in there.
Yeah.
Do you have any further information as to why the third phase of the Naivasha to Kampala link did not go ahead? Because it was my understanding that the negotiations between Uganda and China for a loan were ongoing at some point, and then suddenly had a breakdown or came to a stop.
Well, as you know, there have been issues with the Mombasa-Kenya line in terms of economic viability. And there are issues that arose from the Addis-Djibouti line in terms of the business case as well. And it would appear that China caught cold from its realization that some of the business cases that had been passed to it, on the back of which it was funding this project, did not stack up. And that's essentially what it is. And the excuse now is, oh, we're going to have to look at these business cases again. We're going to do a review. And this is what has held everything up.
Okay.
And then, of course, there are issues about corruption in Kenya and so on, and in Uganda as well. There were allegations. I'm not sure whether they've been bottomed out and whether they've been resolved. But these are some of the things that have led to, and there have been, there've been real politic. The Americans and Europeans have also, been making some curious noises about, what do you call it? About
China's overtures to African infrastructure development.
Indeed, I think there was a phrase that was coined for it in terms of debt colonization or some words to that.
Yeah, debt trap colonization, something like this.
Yes, indeed. So China, of course, needed to tread very carefully in terms of protecting its reputation, and there were stories that were abounding about, I think, in places like Zambia, about assets at risk due to default and so on and so forth. So that has not played very well in terms of the continuity of this project. But that has also encouraged the states to look elsewhere. Because initially, there was this confidence of getting funding from China that they were no longer actually competitively seeking these things. And I think it was one of the things that the Tanzanians did very well in bringing competition into their procurement of the supply chain. And they have reaped quite bountifully as a result. Because when the Chinese are made to compete, then you are able to obtain far better value than when there's no competition, when they're negotiating these deals directly.
Yeah. So Rowland, what would you say is the key issue, if you had to choose one key issue on what is holding this network back? You know, what would that one single thing be? So we talked about finance, interconnectivity not happening, governments perhaps not speaking to other governments. What would you say is the primary issue?
You know, Africa, the pandemic hasn't helped.
No, that's the, yeah.
The last year or so has completely turned things upside down for many states, many countries, and recovering from just that alone is going to take us quite some doing. The West is reeling. China seems to be the only one that's powering ahead since its own recovery. But who's to say where things would be in a year or so's time? I mean, we've seen the resurgence of the pandemic in India. In fact, even in the West, in places like Canada, they still haven't completely sorted it out. So that's one challenge that needs to be resolved. But coming home to Africa, aside from these need for greater coordination, there's still infrastructure issues. I mean, you go to North Africa, most of them now are in a position to electrify. So in Morocco, in Egypt, and you may just find the Maghreb lines are running from Cairo through Algiers into Casablanca, may in fact be electrified. Further down in the rest of Africa, on the east coast, the Addis to Djibouti is electrified. I'm not sure the Mombasa to Nairobi is electrified. But
for now it's diesel, but it will be electrified in the future.
In due course. Places like Nigeria don't even have steady power yet.
Right.
And therefore, but the whole idea is that the systems or the network is being designed in such a way that it can be upgraded in the future when additional capacity for power is available. So that notwithstanding, you may, in terms of the immediate operation, you may have certain inconsistencies in performance. I.e., you may be traveling on a network that has a mix. So you may get decent speeds when you're traveling through Morocco, say, and when you come further down south, you chug along at a more modest speed. But notwithstanding, if the backbone of this network is freight, we don't need electrified tracks for freight. In fact, and that then becomes the more important element. But I think if you ask me, one of the bigger challenges that you would have with a lot of these major projects right now for Africa as a continent is the issue of security. Nigeria is dealing with very, very serious challenges with insurgency at the moment. And that has an impact, aside from the fact that it will be drawing resources away from development, is also the fact that it's distracting in itself from focusing on the construction or the building of infrastructure. Notwithstanding, they have made some progress. For instance, the Lagos to Algiers line, Nigeria has more or less awarded all the contracts for that. If I may show you here, that runs from Lagos all the way through the capital, Abuja, into Kano, and then it goes from Kano into Maradi, through the border town of Jibia to Maradi in Niger Republic, and then it goes all the way through the Sahara, right up to Algiers. Now, Nigeria has awarded all its contracts. The Lagos to Kano bit is being built by the Chinese, and they have completed just one phase. That's the Abuja to Kaduna part of it, just about 100 kilometers. Lagos to Ibadan is also about to be completed. And you've got the other phase that takes you into Kano to come. I think there's been some hiccups with the funding, which is coming from the China exit. But the Kano to Maradi component is been awarded to Mortar Engel, which is a Portuguese firm, very credible organization, who are waiting to start that. And so, as you see, we're inching forward. But as Philippa asked, and this is also where the imperative of coordination comes in. Where is our program? Who is the owner of the program? How do we know? In fact, we've got this ambition of 2063. Aside from the fact that most of us are not going to be here in 2063, probably, is also the fact that so how do we get to 2063? What's the roadmap, and who is the custodian of that? Who manages that? And who obtains the commitments from the various states in terms of when they will build their bits of it. Yes, there are a lot of uncertainties in terms of incomes and funding, access to resources and or funding for these projects, but there must be a plan in terms of how these things would the outturn would be. So that we can continue to refine the plans and continue to update where we are, and and we can model the outputs. At the moment, we've got a 2063 plan, and it's not dynamic. It's been stuck there. There's no one updating it to say, okay, these are and this is how we're now going to adjust outputs or performance against the reality of the moment. So it is that important bit that's really missing. And I know that the AUDA is aware, and I know that there's been efforts at doing something, or putting together a project management team and so on and so forth. But it's one thing to think about these things, it's another thing to do it. It's not being done, and that's why there's the question of whether it'll ever happen.
You would think that with the inauguration of AfTA, the African Free Trade Area, that you really couldn't even propose something like the free trade area without having a transport connectivity. It's almost
very true.
The transport connectivity should come first, and then you have the free trade area. We were talking Nick and I were interviewing Dr. Biryagi, who's from Eastern Congo, from Bukavu, and he was explaining to us, because of the lack of infrastructure in the DRC, it's such a vast country and it has so little road and so little railway. And he was explaining to us that it's impossible to trade north-south of DRC because you can't get the goods unless you go by boat, which is impossibly long, or you have this incredibly long wait to see if your goods ever turn up. And quite often the truck drivers get to DRC from Zambia on the Zambian border, and they say, well, we're not going any further. We're not going to risk our trucks because the roads are so poor.
Yeah.
So it's so important. What can we do? What can we do to make people realize that, make the public aware that they should be demanding the infrastructure rather than, as a primary, as a most important thing?
Well, again, I'm not sure the African public has that leverage to make these demands. One, because politics is so localized in Africa, and therefore you never really have a continental-wide perspective amongst the populace of the individual states, which means that most of the agitation is about local issues. And therefore, all that would ever be agitated over is the internal railway links within their countries. In Nigeria, for instance, there's been a greater awareness about the role of railway within the country. We've had more recently, in the last 6 years, if you like, a very dynamic politician running the transport ministry. And
that's Mr. Rotimi Amici.
Yes, indeed, him. And he's been very effective in putting railway on the front burner of political discourse. And I dare say that it's not really that he's doing a lot more than others before him have done, but he's been able to put it right there in the public domain so that it's been a thing of discussion. His predecessor was a quieter type, and whilst the work was going on, it didn't really, in fact, he was not very visible, so to speak. So in terms of achievement, I think relatively there hasn't been much difference in output, but then you get a sense that there's a lot happening now than there was in the past. But that's one aspect of it, because the public also have a great deal of influence in how the politics is played. But how we are able to get the African states to appreciate the imperative of knocking heads together, of working together, will have to come from the political leadership of the states themselves. And this is where it becomes, I think, a top-down thing rather than a bottom-up. I think it's really, that initiative has to come from the AU rather than from bottom-up. Management is bottom-up, but in terms of initiating the impetus to do more should come from top down.
Perhaps you know, a lot of governments, African governments, are talking about the debt issue and how so much of government revenue is to pay off debt and debt servicing. Just a thought there that perhaps the money being paid back to many International Monetary Fund programs, etc., could instead be reinvested in building infrastructure, because in building the network, because that would not only benefit all of the African economies, it would benefit the world. What would you say to an idea like that?
Yes, but again, this is the politics of it. We've still got to come back to the economics in terms of how you sustain it. You can build infrastructure all you like, and you're talking about huge amounts of money, billions of dollars, which are not that easy to find, and especially in Africa, where you've got problems of, you know, malnutrition, you've got health issues, poverty. Sometimes it is a real challenge when you access these huge amounts of money and you say, oh, we just want to build a railway, and you've got children dying from malnutrition and curable diseases and so on and so forth. So it's that trade-off. But notwithstanding, whatever investments are done in infrastructure must be able to sustain themselves. Railway particularly don't offer a great business case. For instance, if you are an entrepreneur who had some capital, railways perhaps will not provide you with the greatest yield. But for states, they see it as an enabler and catalyst for development. And therefore, states are able to invest in the infrastructure. But those investments are what we would call a sunk cost. It's not something that we would hope to recover. Certainly not in terms of financially. You may recover that from the explosion in development and ability to how do you call it? The multiplier effect.
Right, yes.
But
I mean,
is the sustainability of that investment that
absolutely
from a decent operation. Because if the operation is able to pay for itself on the back of that investment, then your quid's in. And it's that model that still hasn't sunk in with a lot of African states. And it is that is really the message that they need to get across. That it's important that private sector be brought in to operate their railway infrastructure. That's the bottom line.
I mean, we see this. We see that with China's rail network. I mean, China has the most advanced rail network in the world.
Yeah.
And a lot of their lines, they don't make a profit. There's actually, I mean, the Beijing-Shanghai line, which is the busiest of all the train network, is just starting to gain a profit in the past few years. And it was originally conceived all the way back in 2007. So that just goes to show you, even a line like that, where you have two cities with combined 40 million plus people living in them, it takes a while before those train lines start to directly pay off themselves. But as China's shown, you know, by expanding that rail network, the economic benefits that have come in the form of business and diversification of the economy, and by industrialization of the inner land of the central part of China, where we see the old centers of the ancient Silk Road, so Xi'an and those such places, have all developed extremely fast, and that's largely down to the realization of an integrated and harmonized rail network. And China is a huge country. I mean, Africa can take a big leaf out of their book and see the way, take some lessons from the way that they've developed that system. but it does require a certain amount of harmonization, even between the different provinces in China. They've had to work very hard on that integration and make sure that those lines join up, but not only join up, that they actually make economic sense and that they're going to be used by both the business side, the private side of economies, and also by the public too.
Indeed.
And that's paid off
one
huge
country.
dividends. Yeah,
And that's
exactly.
one country, regardless of how vast it is. And where you now start talking about a continent with various countries and with varying interests and sometimes conflicting interests, becomes a challenge. And I think something else that was highlighted earlier or previously was the need for one of the benefits as well that we would get from coordination is harmonization and strategy. Because at the moment, the states appear to be negotiating their financing deals individually. So they go to China. I'm trying to remember
Turkish.
We've had I think, just give me a minute.
No, not at all. Not at all.
The thing with the railways, which can never be oversaid, is that the overall benefit to any economy is so incredible. So like you were saying earlier, Nick, that even though that line in China is not making money, a profit now, the overall effect of developing the physical economy has that is what Africa needs. It is the most important thing.
You see, China also, what they're very effective, it's not just about the train lines. What Mr. Ataguba was saying earlier is about beltways, transport corridors, where, you know, for example, along that Beijing-Shanghai line, there are a multitude of cities along that line that weren't there 15 years ago. And they are only have come to be there because China has made such things as special economic zones where there are tax incentives to set up factories and business. And you see the population move to these economic centers. And this can happen. But it's like Mr. Ataguba was saying, like, it's very much more difficult for a continent because you have all of these conflicting interests, and there's a lot more politics involved than per se with China, which has a much more authoritarian model anyway in political system that can have a very top-down approach. And that is where China has had a major advantage to every country, not just Africa. We see with such projects like Crossrail in the UK. I'm sure you know a lot about this, Rowland. It's been a nightmare, and it's been 20 years in the making, and British people have been, you know, have thrown away their clocks by now.
We've stopped talking about the cost.
Yeah, the budget went, you know, almost doubled. And the people switched off at some point to the whole idea. Even high-speed rail too, which has also been talked about in England for a long time, somehow cannot be realized. In our political system, it's really struggling to harmonize the vision of our government at the moment. It's causing, in infrastructure development, it does appear that democracies do struggle to come to realize much development whatsoever, especially in the past 20 years since the turn of the millennium. It's definitely been such.
Well, because of the huge costs involved, the huge amounts of money involved, and the competing interests. You've got, I mean, central government will always find pressure on resources for other things it has responsibility for, law and order, health sector, education, and so on. And and especially, I mean, these are even the well-resourced or relatively better resourced economies, as in Europe and in the West. In Africa, it's a zero-sum game, and with so much conflict as well, it becomes a real nightmare for many countries to find these resources, to prosecute some of these programs. And these programs, these sort of investments are their way out of poverty. These are what would enable to lift up their economy. So it's very much a chicken and egg situation for a lot of them. But notwithstanding, I think as Chairman Mao has said, journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. We've got to
exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. There are the short-term consequences of these things. There are also the long-term, and sometimes it's hard for political systems to realize the long-term benefits, especially when their election cycle is only 4 years long. So that's also sometimes a bit of a sticking point. Rowland, tell us about this large page that you present to us here, delivering the vision, just to bring us full circle today. What do we have here?
Well, again, this put together a program, a 10-year program, a fast-track plan to enable us get to 2063, or I think it was a 2043 vision in 10 years. And this was essentially, well, in terms of the options, we thought there were 3 options that we looked at, which was number 1, the do-nothing option, which was essentially forget about building anything. It was a no-brainer. It's not going to happen because we've already started implementing a vision of sorts, if you like. Second option was no change, meaning stick with the vision as has been conceived, a 2033 plan. The 2033 plan, that plan as a first phase, and the 2043 plan as second phase, which means that this year being 2021, we've got 22 years to deliver the complete program. Now, we think that you can do this thing a lot quicker. One, by reviewing the scope and see how you can actually run things concurrently. Essentially, you could fast track this plan, and rather than 22 years or 23 years as it was as of last year, you could actually crash it in 10 years. And hopefully within that time frame, we will still be alive to see it to fruition. And ran through some activities which we thought were essential, some key milestones. The first one being establishing program teams. And if I think in the earlier slide, we conceived these, I don't know whether that's ahead, These were the program teams which were along the RECs, the regional economic communities. So these projects were going to be done along those blocks. You had the ECOWAS block, which is the West African block. So a lot of the lines, and if you remember the schedules, if I went to the main schedule, if you took like the Tunis, Algiers, and Casablanca bit of the network, which connected three countries, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, nearly 2,000 kilometers of track. That is domiciled within the UMA regional economic bloc, being the Maghreb Union. Now, that sort of line you would domicile in the Maghreb. Where is the Maghreb? Okay. There's I think.
Is it not the EGAD?
Yes, it would come under the EGAD. Because as you know, with the RECs, there are some overlaps. I think here we have the list of regional economic centers, communities. Sorry, I'm not sure it comes under EGAD. I think it comes under SENSAD.
Ah, right.
Yes.
Ah, SENSAD. I see. Yes.
Oh yeah.
This comes under SENSAD. In that the work breakdown structure that we put together. The UMA, because all the members happen to be members of SENSAD as well. So SENSAD was going to look after not only that project, but several other projects within that economic community. Dito ECOWAS. ECOWAS, for instance, would deal with the Lagos, Abuja component, Lagos, Maradi, and so on and so forth. And of course, you'd find that the Maradi to Algiers part of that railway line could come under SENSAD, or you may find that both offices would cooperate in such a way that the entire line is devolved to one program management office to look after the entire project. But again, these are negotiations that can take place between them.
Yeah, I mean, these institutions would be great for intergovernmental dialogue. It would be great for trust building as well between the nations.
Indeed. Now, you create these program teams, and then, of course, there are the feasibility studies as well that must go into, and the business planning in terms of, and this is where we talked about the sustainability of these.
Right.
And under this plan, the idea was that we could schedule a lot of these activities to run concurrently, and therefore quite a lot of things would be going on within these different program teams at the same time. Everyone is doing similar things in their areas of control. But within the project management or program management teams, you then have lots of projects, because within one REC, take ECOWAS for instance, and let me go back to my original master plan. We've got the, oh yeah, this is a huge one. The Dakar, Bamako, Ouagadougou, Niamey, N'Djamena, Khartoum. That's an east-west. It goes all the way from across, what, 6 countries. That's, yeah.
That one.
Right across, all the way, Khartoum.
That would be brilliant for the Sahel region.
Absolutely. And then you find with that, you've got ECOWAS, SENSAD, as the two regional economic communities responsible for that. The Dakar, Bamako component, right, forming part of, because of course, as you know, there is a detailed scoping study that has been produced for this program. And under that, we had some pilot projects that had been identified, and Dakar Bamako was one of those pilots, and that's what's being highlighted here as one of the first projects that would go forward. And so essentially the point I was making here is that some of these activities being run concurrently by different program teams. And therefore, we reckon that all of that feasibility planning and business planning can be done within a year and a half, within the first 18 months. We're running these things concurrently, so as we're establishing the teams are getting in and into the pre-feasibility. We're also appointing transaction advisors, and these are transaction advisors at the top there.
Right.
In the program directorate. The program directorate, I think AUDA HQ, NEPAD, I think they're somewhere in Johannesburg, somewhere in South Africa, I think.
Okay.
Or AU HQ in Nairobi. You could, of course, set up your program directorate where is logistically most convenient for them to operate from. It's a continent-wide program, and therefore its location is where best it can be most effective from. With the AFCTA HQ now in Ghana, Accra suddenly also offers itself as a major candidate for the situation of the directorate.
A lot of good things happening in Ghana, aren't there? So it's pretty motivated and
yes, but then attracting jealousy from a lot of the others, like us in Nigeria.
Right.
So yes, now within that program directorate that we situated up here, we think that the champion or the headship of that program directorate is in a program director, and within that directorate and supporting him is program assurance, and the whole role of program assurance is to ensure consistency in vision, and also that appropriate systems are in place to ensure certainty of outcome. Program stakeholder coordination deals more with hand-holding and massaging egos of states. As when you're dealing with politicians, it's very
it's necessary
counseling, psychology.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. Then, of course, program administration is more internal, and that's very technical. It's about project management, really. And that's really is, and these are not, and this is another problem that you have with institutions like the AU. They tend to be very bureaucratic. And the whole idea behind this plan is that we can have something that's pretty trim and therefore agile, rather than something that's, that's huge and
heavy and slow moving.
Indeed, and decisions become cumbersome and hard to come to, and so on and so forth. Now, under the program director, and this then goes to the RECs, at the REC level, which is each of these brown boxes. You then got a program steering committee, and we've taken, I think we've expanded the SENSAD one. I mean, each REC would have an identical program management organization, within which you would have a program manager, and then you would have various program management disciplines or components in terms of program assurance, stakeholder coordination, program administration, and then of course they cascade down into the various projects that add up to the entire program. That's in terms of the organization breakdown structure. But in terms of the delivery program, you need transaction advisors to advise in terms of the feasibility of operations. That's really about the transaction. And those transactions are about appointing operators. It's really helping the states to appoint operators. And that also enables a more joined up thinking in terms of the interoperability, cross borders, and so on and so forth. Things like customs unions, and so on.
Yeah.
So global thinking in terms of how you're going to operate this, the various businesses. And you may have services within the RECs, or you may have inter-REC services, or you may have continental-wide train services, just like you have in the EU. It didn't start that way. First started services within a few countries, and then as the economic community, as it was originally, grew and strengthened and became a union, then it became a matter of necessity for the various members to integrate their transport networks and so on. And this is the ambition for us in Africa, that we can actually grow these things more quickly than an evolution, rather more of a revolution. So
a leapfrog.
Absolutely,
leapfrog
to get there quicker. Then, of course, the establishment of the institutional infrastructure. This is you're creating all of these, call it, and what we mean by institutional infrastructure is there needs to be regulation. And these would need to be, to have, I don't know whether you want to call it an umbrella, so that it's continent-wide rather than regulate. And because you are talking about individual states, there would have to be some treaties. You've got customs unions, you've got treaties about regulation, about
levies, tariffs,
all of that.
Universal agreements for the continent to harmonize these.
That's right. So that's what we mean by establish the institutional infrastructure. And as you can see, that we've allowed about 3 years because we think that there's a lot of horse trading that'll be involved in that. It's a very political aspect of it. And then, of course, the bankability of feasibilities, because this is key in funding, in finding the financing for a lot of these. And there is the possibility that not all the lines would be feasible financially, and you would need to find some other form of financing these. Either the states would understand that they would need to fund these out of their pockets or take loans, and you know, to support their own developmental needs and so on. But these are decisions that would flow from the feasibilities that we done. Now,
in the business planning stage.
Yes, indeed.
Right.
And then of course you procure the concessionaires. Those concessionaires are operators, guys who would operate the various lines. Some of them may be local concessionaires, local operators, just operating railways within countries or across border or continent-wide. On different packages that are put together from all of the preliminary studies that take place. Quite clearly, these advisors need to be paid, and there would need to be some agreement within the states into how they would fund that. And they may get support from various African continental institutions. You've got the ADB, you've got Afrexim, and there are various other sources from other multilateral agencies.
BRICS, you could call on the BRICS Development Bank.
Indeed. And then of course we've allowed all of that time for 10 years for construction, for procurement, and for mobilization. We've allowed that, and if you notice, that bar stretches right from inception right to the end. Sometimes you may wonder, how come you've got some of this development activity taking place and you're already on site and so on? The logic is simple. Some of these projects are already under construction. Some of them have already started. I gave you the example of Nigeria, where Lagos to Kano to Maradi has already been is underway. So this allows you to do all of that. The new projects may start somewhere midstream, somewhere in the middle of this bar and going. But the idea is that within 10 years, you conclude the construction of all the lines. And of course, the operations as well would follow the same kind of trajectory and into the future. So, in a nutshell, it is doable. I think it is. But then there'll always, as with all major endeavors, there'll be challenges, and the ability to overcome these would determine the outcomes. Key success factors that we thought needed to be internalized. Clear definition. You must know what it is you're seeking to achieve. And we call them clear and measurable goals, and that derives from the objectives and the benefits. As long as everyone is clear in terms of what it is that we're trying to achieve, how we're going, and what we're doing, then I think the chances of success are enhanced. We've got delivery teams, integrity of delivery teams, competence and institutional capacity. They are fundamental to their achievement and capacity to achieve. Credible baseline. I don't think it needs further definition. You don't know what it is here, where your starting point is, and I'm not sure you know where you're going. So, stability of the program concept and current delivery strategy, very, very key success factor. Stakeholders, as I say, know your stakeholders and you will know beliefs. with so much, we talked in terms of disparate stakeholders, in terms of so many states and so many interests, some of them conflicting. There's need for a lot of handholding, a lot of consultation, and a lot of patience as well. But through consultation, you're able to build commitment and to hold that commitment as well. Environmental sensitivity, we talked about security issues, particularly in Africa, and with more awareness of global warming and climate change, there's certainly a need for entente and for everyone to be on the same page in that regard. What about risks? With all programs of this nature, unforeseeables are clear and present danger.
Like a pandemic.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Per se.
We still don't know when we will see the back of it and what the final effect or impact would be. The key risk to major enterprises such as this program. Quality in terms of spec and how efficiently or effectively we're integrating the various resources and the various components of the network. Scope creep, that's another ever-present danger in program management, where the scope just continues to grow and grow and grow, and out of control sometimes, and threatens the program. It's a big risk. So you need, and particularly with a program such as this, where you have a coordinator whose authority derives more from persuasion rather than from his ability to crack a whip, right? Because he hasn't got a whip hound. He's more a consensus builder.
Right, ultimate negotiator.
Indeed. So there's that element of that. So cohesion and the shared vision in project or program organizations, another key risk factor, because you've got so varied cultures in Africa. You've got across the regional blocks and even within regional communities in West Africa, for instance, you've got both French-speaking or Francophone West Africa and English-speaking have quite different cultures, and there's a need for these to be harnessed and for vision to be shared. Very key risks as a result of that. And of course, the environmental issues, political, economic, sociological, technological, all of which, create tensions and the ability to and can put up obstacles to effective delivery of this vision. In a nutshell, those are things that we need to overcome and the things that could lead to the success of the program.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think the strategy you put forward and the proposals you've made today will go a long way to alleviating some of those risks or remedying some of them. So yeah, the proposals like these can only serve to better the future, to increase the potential and the potential realization of such a grand scheme. And thank you so much, Mr. Ataguba, for sharing your vision with us today. It's been a real pleasure. yeah, it's unrivaled. Actually, to this day, I haven't heard anyone come forward with such grand proposals. So it's really brilliant work. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nick.
But if you would just explain this last part to us. Sorry, I think I, interjected a little too early there.
It's my favorite. It's my favorite slide, and I include it in nearly all my presentations.
It's lovely.
It's
wonderful.
It's very humorous. Yeah.
It goes to the heart through humor, but it goes to the heart of everything we do and say, which is that for teams to be effective and to deliver a vision, that vision must be shared by everyone through the supply chain. And if you look at these tree swing, you can see from the first image what the consultant designed or recommended. The second image is what the engineer designed.
Got well overcomplicated, didn't he?
Indeed.
Or she.
We know what our engineers are like. What procurement or the buying department, purchasing, ordered.
I think it was a male engineer who designed.
Yeah, go on then. We'll take the baton for that one.
Look at what the vendor supplied. Needed. And how it was modified by the users. Now they had to chop the tree, and chop it off, so you could, and yet all those wanted.
That's what the people wanted.
Yeah,
just a little swing.
Just a swing.
An old car tire with a piece of rope.
Yeah.
All you wanted was a swing. Something that would swing.
Yeah, just something that would swing.
And it goes to the heart of it that this vision, unless it is shared, we may not have the success that we wish for the African continent with this railway. But I thank you so much for your time, and I thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you, Rowland.
Thank you so much.
It's been wonderful. Thank you so
it
much.
Really has. Yeah.
And we wish you the best of luck. We're waiting to hear for your proposal to be adopted.
Rowland, if you could just tell us briefly before I let you go, where can we follow your work with, do you have a publication of any kind, or?
It's in the works. I have a lot of material that's, all over the place, but we have, our business has a website that has been under redevelopment, and the whole idea of the redevelopment, I think if you go there right now, it will tell you it's under maintenance. And the whole idea was to bring all these strands, because there are many other things I'm actually involved in, aside from advisory work that we do. We actually trade as well. We trade commodities. And so we're trying to bring so many strands of our business together under this website. I expect it should go live by next Saturday. Not this one, I think a week.
The next week.
I think in a week's time or so, if not sooner.
Brilliant, we'll be following that.
And the whole idea is to link it up with all the social media stuff, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. At the moment, I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. I think there's a lot of my commentary that goes on LinkedIn, but it's mostly about railway.
Wonderful.
Yeah, brilliant. I'll be keeping track to watch that go up. I'm always looking for new information, and it's very inspiring, whatever it is.
Anytime, I'm always available. Certainly have a chin wag. And African Railway is my passion. I think we have let ourselves down a great deal on the continent, and that there's a lot more we could be doing. And I hope that with a lot of prodding from individuals like myself and a few other like minds, that we can continue to encourage political leadership to be more committed towards governance and outcomes.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with that, Rowland. I think it's a now or never approach, and you know, when there's so much to be gained, it does make the future decisions easier if people can look to those long-term horizons and see that something like this will really lift the entire population of the continent to a new and a new standard of living. So
yeah, and that it could happen in 10 years, as Rowland says, then wow, how can you not go for that?
Yeah.
How can you not change the face of Africa in 10 years?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for today.
Thank you, Rowland. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Take care.